After the American Revolution, the British lost one of their most valuable colonies, the United States. You might think that a superpower like Britain, known for its vast empire and military might, would have tried to reclaim the land they lost. So why didn't they? Why didn't Britain make any serious attempts to retake the United States after its independence? And how close did they come to trying? Let's dive into the real reasons behind Britain's decision to let America go. So let's set the stage. The year is 1783. After a grueling war, the American colonies have secured their independence from Britain. The British, understandably, were not thrilled. They had lost an essential part of their empire, a place rich in resources and economic potential. And yet, over the next century, there was no major attempt to retake the land they lost. Why? The reasons go beyond just military strategy or lack of interest. It was a combination of political, economic, and global factors that shaped Britain's decision to just let it go. Right after the American Revolution, Britain wasn't in a rush to get back into a fight with their former colonies. Why? Well, for starters, the new American government wasn't exactly off to a smooth start. It wasn't clear how the newly independent United States would even function. Remember, these were 13 separate colonies now trying to work together as a single nation. And guess what? They couldn't quite agree on how to make that work. There were arguments, debates, and confusion about how this new country should be governed. This chaos meant that for a while, the old rules and systems of trade between Britain and America still applied. For Britain, this was actually a pretty good deal. They could still make money without having to bear the cost of running the colonies. Why rock the boat? And here's another thing. Many British leaders believed that this whole American independence experiment wouldn't last. In the late 18th century, monarchy was still seen as the most natural form of government. So, many in Britain thought that the Americans would soon realize their mistake, get tired of their Republican experiment, and maybe even come back to the British crown, hat in hand. They figured, why fight to take it back when they might just ask to rejoin? After all, Britain itself had dabbled with republicanism in the 17th century, and it didn't exactly stick. The British elite believed that once the novelty of independence wore off, the Americans would realize the benefits of having a king again. But things didn't turn out that way. Instead of collapsing, the United States drafted a new constitution and started to stabilize. However, by then, Britain had much bigger problems to worry about: the French Revolution. By 1789, France was in turmoil, and soon after it became a threat that consumed Europe's attention for the next couple of decades. From 1792 to 1815, Britain found itself locked in a series of wars with France. When you're fighting for survival against Napoleon, the idea of launching a risky campaign across the Atlantic to reclaim the United States just doesn't make a lot of sense. Britain needed to focus on its more immediate threat, which was right across the English Channel. Now, the War of 1812 is an interesting chapter. Some might argue that this was Britain's last real shot at reclaiming some American territory. The British were impressing American sailors, tensions were high, and the two countries went to war. So, did Britain try to take back the United States then? Not exactly, but there were some interesting ambitions. Under Prime Minister Lord Liverpool, the British weren't aiming to conquer all of the United States, but to possibly expand their holdings at America's expense. One of the more intriguing plans involved Maine. The border between British America, Canada, and the United States wasn't clearly defined, and some British leaders saw an opportunity. They wanted to annex Maine and turn it into a new colony called New Ireland. They actually occupied much of the area during the war. The thinking was that if things went well, the Americans might just give it up. Why didn't Britain push further? But then, something surprising happened. When peace negotiations began, Britain didn't ask for a single inch of territory, not one. Why? The reasons are quite strategic. At that moment, Britain's primary concern wasn't the American border, it was Europe. The Napoleonic Wars had just ended, and Europe was a mess. The map of Europe was being redrawn, and Britain's main goal was to ensure that these new boundaries would prevent future wars. The British were more worried about keeping the French from reigniting conflict than they were about claiming a slice of Maine. Plus, by this time, North America wasn't the prize it had been in the past. Britain's eyes were set on expanding its influence in India and Africa. There were also growing tensions with Russia and Central Asia. Essentially, Britain had bigger fish to fry. Reclaiming parts of the United States just wasn't worth the effort or the risk, especially when that risk involved possibly losing Canada if the Americans decided to fight back fiercely. By the mid-19th century, a new reality. And as time marched on into the mid-19th century, the idea of retaking America became even more of a fantasy. By then, the United States had grown into a formidable power of its own. Its economy was booming, its military was expanding, and its influence was spreading. For Britain, engaging in a conflict to retake any part of the United States now meant potentially losing much more, including their hold on Canada. That wasn't a gamble they were willing to take, so the dream of reclaiming any American territory died and the British moved on. Conclusion: letting go of the past. In the end, the story of why Britain never attempted to retake the United States after the Revolution is one of practicality over pride. While the initial loss stung, Britain quickly realized that attempting to reclaim their former colonies wasn't worth the cost or the risk. They had larger, more pressing concerns in Europe, Asia, and Africa, and the United States, despite its early struggles, had proven to be a stronger, more stable nation than they initially anticipated. And so Britain did what empires do when faced with a costly endeavor that doesn't promise substantial returns. They let it go. It's a reminder that even the greatest powers have to pick their battles wisely. After all, you can't rule the world if you're spread too thin. Closing call to action. If you found this deep dive into British history and geopolitics interesting, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. We've got plenty more stories of empires, wars, and the decisions that shaped our modern world. Stay curious, and we'll see you in the next video.